forward bulkhead and is executed at the apogee, or the highest point of Earth's current orbit around the Earth. This deorbit burn will alter Dragon's path to ultimately line it up to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and splash down off the coast of Florida. Splashdown today is planned for 2:57 p.m. Pacific or 5:57 p.m. Eastern.
The Crew 9 mission began a little differently than usual, since Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov arrived in the Crew 9 spacecraft in September, autonomously. First, it's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very comfortable for Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander during the re-entry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the spacecraft and the trunk in preparation for that trunk separation that I mentioned earlier. Now, as we saw before, we are hoping to get more views inside of the Dragon capsule. We will bring those, of course. We want to see more of our 4 crew members. But now a bit more of the Dragon Freedom capsule. It has flown on several missions for NASA. It first launched April 27th, 2022. To the International Space Station on NASA's SpaceX Crew 4 mission. It was subsequently used for 2 private spaceflight missions to the space station for Axiom Space, Axiom Mission 2 in May 2023, and Axiom Mission 3 in January of 2024. And of course, Crew 9 launched last year, is September 28th. So yeah, a little bit about the Dragon Freedom capsule. Here, a view that we have once again between the shoulders of Commander Nick Hague, who is on the left-hand side of your screen there, and Mission Specialist Alexander Gorbanov there on the right.
That's right, Kate. And the next major milestone that we're looking ahead towards this afternoon is claw separation. We're targeting that claw separation at 2:05 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon, so less than 10 minutes from now. Continuing to get some views inside Dragon Freedom. To the far left there is NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore. And as you can see, the crew is suited up in their space suits. They are suited up in what we call dynamic phases of flight. So when they launch, when they dock, when they undock, when they return back for splashdown. We might hear some call outs on the loops about putting their visors down. That will happen just prior to deorbit burn. And you'll hear us pause when some of those communications happen. That's because we want to make sure that we are relaying the best information to you all, and so that you hear it as well. So if you do hear us pause, that is what we're doing. You also see they have their on there, and I know the gloves are pretty unique on the Dragon spacesuits, right? They're custom created?
Yes, the spacesuit overall is custom fit for each astronaut. These gloves enable usage of the touchscreen panels that they have in front of them. We can't see it from this view, but that view we saw earlier between Alexander Gorbanov and Nick Hague, that is a touchscreen. It allows the crew to monitor everything that Dragon is doing, along with those tablets that they have there on their legs. So yeah, the spacesuit itself is intended to act as a mini spaceship, if you will, as once the visors are closed, it is able to maintain a pressure in the unlikely event of a depressurization event for Dragon. So there we can see those screens I was talking about. So there in the center, we've got the location tracker, as well as on the left-hand side, it's mapping out the operations that Dragon is executing. The crew has to remain well informed of all these things that Dragon is doing autonomously. That
as Crew 9 returns home.
Indeed. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at Dragon. One of the great things about being close to the space station is that we can use space station cameras to look at Dragon. But now that Dragon is on its way home, we don't have those external cameras. So here's an animation of what the capsule looks like. We've got the pressurized section, the capsule on the top, and the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those solar panels that we manufacture in-house are located, soaking up the energy from the sun and turning it into power for the capsule. At the very top of the capsule is the nose cone. That is where the Dracos, the forward Dracos, are located. That nose cone is currently open, not closed like we saw in that animation. Once we get through the final maneuverings for the re-entry phase, we will close. All the crew has to do is stay strapped into their seats and keep tabs on things. Although I must say, if I had one of those window seats, it would be pretty difficult to restrain myself. Now, with Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander ready to deorbit and splash down back on Earth, they will be heading to one of 8 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of America or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather. For those of you following along, you'll know that today's splashdown marks our final Dragon recovery on the East Coast. After 6 great years of successful recovery operations off the East Coast, we'll be moving all Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast.
And as always, NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown location. And for today, the prime recovery site is off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory or path that it follows, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedules for the returning crew members, as well as, of course, the big one, the weather. Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague of Crew Dragon Freedom. We did hear that the loss of signal period is still at 2:44 p.m. Pacific, but we had a 1-minute adjustment to the acquisition of signal. That's going to now be at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. However, our splashdown time remains the same at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
So all good news there as Dragon continues to make its way home with the Crew 9 crew. As we've mentioned before, we are splashing down on the Gulf Coast. We have ability to splash down on either side of Florida, but the location site just outside of Tallahassee, Florida is the site that was selected today due to best recovery conditions. And as Sandra mentioned before, weather is always a watch item, but everything is looking great for that particular recovery location. So I'm sure once we start getting views from the recovery vessel, I have a feeling 5:51 p.m. Eastern time or 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. We right there have our first view of Dragon Freedom coming home to Earth.
And that view is from the WB-57, which is one of NASA's high-altitude planes that is tracking. Now, because of the way that this camera is configured, it does look like it is dark, but it is indeed daytime, and you're beginning to see that plasma trail as Dragon re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. All of that is expected. We are anticipating an acquisition of signal around 2:51 p.m. Pacific time, so just minutes from now, and you may hear the Corps begin to hail out or call Dragon for communications and see if we can potentially get communications with them a little bit earlier. Following this, we'll have 2 events in rapid succession. We'll have the drogue parachutes deploy at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, followed by the mains just 1 minute later at 2:54 p.m. Pacific time, ahead of a splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
So it really gives you a sense of why that plasma builds up on the exterior of the capsule thanks to the heat shield and the work that it does. Those drogue parachutes will slow it down from 350 to about 119 miles per hour. We can see
15 kilometers. Brace for drogue window.
We can see seat rotation happening inside the capsule. Great to get those first views of our crew members. Once again, the capsules are going about 350 miles per hour when the drogues are deployed. Those drogue parachutes that we manufacture here in-house are going to slow the spacecraft down to 119 miles per hour. And that is when we will see the main parachutes deploy, and that occurs about 6,000 feet above the ocean's surface.
And we are expecting drogue deployment at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, so we should see it any second now. And there you are getting a great view of Crew 9 inside Dragon Freedom as it returns back to Earth. We are awaiting the drogue deploys. This view coming from the WB-57 high-altitude plane. And there you see it on your screen, drogue deployment.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
You can hear the crowd here.
Visual on 2 healthy drogues.
The crowd here very excited as Dragon Freedom continues to make its way back to planet Earth.
Next up, we'll stand by for the main deployment of the parachutes. The mains are quite a bit larger. You'll be able to notice the difference on your screen once they deploy, and they continue to ensure that the Dragon spacecraft slows down even further. As we mentioned, Freedom will be traveling 16 miles per hour when it splashes down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, here at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. And there we go.
We have visual on 4 healthy mains.
That view was from inside.
Freedom copy.
That view was from inside one of the buckets where the parachutes are located. So we see a great view there of the reefing on those parachutes. And as those main parachutes begin to inflate fully, 4 beautiful, healthy mains. Now awaiting visuals of splashdown.
Freedom, 1,000.
We'll start to hear Commander Nick Hague.
Copy, 1,000.
As we heard right there, Commander Nick Hague will be calling out the altitude of the Dragon capsule from here on out. Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. You can see those parachutes continuing to slow the Dragon capsule down.
And if you're just joining us, you're looking at
800 meters.
a live view of Crew 9, just minutes away from splashing down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Splashdown 2 minutes from now at 2:57 p.m. Pacific. We do have 4 healthy mains really doing the job there. Just breathtaking views of a calm, glass-like ocean off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Crew 9 just minutes away from splashing down.
This is really such an incredible shot.
Copy, 600.
That was a live view from our recovery vessel, Megan, which is stationed a couple miles away from the splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew 9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown located in the Gulf of America off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown. Crew 9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.
And as you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation of splashdown. Dragon Freedom has returned home, and NASA astronauts.
System safety verifications are in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Understand. And, we're in section 2, 4.800 landing response. And looking for your words on if it is necessary.
In the distance, we can see the recovery vessel making its way.
Copy, you're in section 2 for the environmental assessment in 4.800. That is not necessary today.
Understand. Raising buzz.
So we will continue to have communications between the Corps and Nick Hague, the commander of Crew Dragon Freedom, which just splashed down 2 minutes ago off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Dragon Freedom has returned home with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sonny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbunoff. They're back on Earth after approximately 17 hours of a return journey from space.
The SpaceX recovery ship and team have been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and they will now make their way to the splashdown location. The teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes or so to make their way
and
to
SpaceX Freedom. Pretty sure we're in stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. We see the same.
It's going to take about 30 minutes for the recovery team to make their way over to Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander, who are still seated and secured inside that Dragon spacecraft there on your screen. Incredible views there of that thermal protection system, or TPS. That Dragon capsule was pristine, white color before it departed the station, and we can see how the reentry phase, the thermal protection system did its job. Now, if you're wondering what that hole, that like bucket area is, that is underneath the side hatch. That is where the main parachutes were stored. So when we saw the Dragon capsule docked at station, it looked very different. The panel that protects and covers the main parachutes, that was still intact, as well as the panels that enclose where the drogue parachutes are located. We can see those fast
Freedom.
boats.
SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in the next few minutes.
Freedom copies.
We can see those fast boats. We weren't kidding when we said they were fast. While it does take about 30 minutes for the main recovery vessel to make its way over to the capsule, these fast boats will be doing a couple of things simultaneously. A couple of them are going to be working to retrieve the parachutes that you see in the background there of this drone shot. Those parachutes will be retrieved from the ocean surface. We want to make sure we are able to pull those out. The recovery vessel there closest to the spacecraft is going to be performing some safety checks. We can see there they're using an instrument that is basically working to detect if there are any hypergolic vapors or fumes that are still residing in and or around the Draco thruster nozzles or outlets. The hypergolic fuel, which is necessary for on-orbit burns to maneuver the spacecraft. Unfortunately, those hypergolics are unable to be breathed. They are toxic, and so this team here is doing those initial safety checks to make sure that it is safe for the rest of the recovery team to approach the spacecraft. They're also checking to make sure that any residuals from the pyros are safe and are not going to cause any issues. We can see the team working their way around the spacecraft to do these these sniff tests on all of those Draco thrusters.
And as we continue to await the recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov inside, Dragon has autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. We are continuing to see Dragon in what is known as stable 1 configuration. That's kind of the ideal configuration following splashdown. It's upright, and the Dragon capsule is in the right configuration for it to be hoisted into the recovery vessel Megan, which you do see a little ways off in your screen approaching. Dragon will continue to remain live on air with you through that recovery process, all the way through the point where the crew is extracted from the Dragon spacecraft. Now, if you are just joining us, the mission has gone smoothly so far. Dragon successfully splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon.
Approximately 17 hours prior to splashdown, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station, completed a series of departure burns, jettisoned its trunk section, and performed its final burn, the deorbit burn. This placed the Dragon spacecraft on a trajectory toward Tallahassee, Florida. Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. We're now going to follow the
Freedom. Hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 25 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC with SpaceX flight surgeon.
And so what we did just hear there was communications that those hypergol checks were complete. They didn't find any of that upon those checks, so we'll continue to move through the timeline. Next up is a process called rigging, which you see happening right now on your screen. This is when a SpaceX recovery personnel actually works to climb aboard the capsule and work through procedures ahead of lifting onto the nest of the recovery vessel Megan. We heard it's going to be about 25 minutes or so until that lift actually takes place.
Okay, Freedom, the next call will be from the SpaceX flight surgeon on Dragon to Ground Private.
Understand. Thank you.
callouts there indicating that the crew will have the opportunity to do a quick check-in with the SpaceX flight surgeon. This is standard procedure for every Dragon spacecraft when it returns to Earth. It's just an initial check-in, make sure everybody is doing okay. They will also have another check-in with the flight surgeon once they are on board that recovery vessel that you see there in the background. We can now see that SpaceX recovery team member they're on top of the Dragon spacecraft. They are going to be working to install plugs in the Draco thrusters to ensure that none of those, and to ensure that no more hypergolic fumes or vapors come out from the spacecraft.
They'll on every moment of this process. And with that, I'll toss it back over to you guys in Hawthorne.
Thank you so much. That was Jaden Jennings, NASA Public Affairs Officer, who watched Freedom splash down firsthand from the recovery vessel Megan. Thanks so much, Jaden. So we are continuing to get these great views on our screen here of Freedom. As we mentioned, it splashed down at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The recovery personnel are continuing to step through procedures to hoist Dragon onto the recovery vessel Megan there, which is now coming into view. You can see just how close Megan is at this point, and that's that helicopter pad that Jaden was just discussing, where the crew will fly off of onto the coast of Florida, and then eventually they'll fly back to Houston.
Just underneath that helicopter pad is that translation deck where we will see the nest once it is loaded up with the Dragon spacecraft on board. The nest will be translated to the forward end of the recovery vessel, and that is where our Crew 9 team members will egress from the Dragon spacecraft. Now, here on your screen, we can see dolphins, actually, who want to come and play with Dragon. Now, one of the fast boats there in place, working to assist the recovery team member. It's incredible. I just love these views. We really see them even better in daytime, but just seeing the recovery team work in tandem to step through each step, to step through each operation. Obviously they're getting quick assists from the honorary part of the recovery team, those dolphins in the water there. Now, the recovery team member that is crawling around the Dragon spacecraft. Earlier, we saw a view where it was like a spider monkey pose. We can see that individual now standing in the bucket where the main parachutes were stored while Dragon was on orbit. Obviously, those main parachutes were utilized for splashdown today. They were deployed and cut from the Dragon capsule, and one of the other fast boats of the recovery team working to pull those out of the water. Now, the recovery team member that is there working on top of the Dragon capsule. Earlier, we saw that person performing safety checks. Now we can see some harnessing being placed around the capsule. This harnessing is what will be used to lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. Wow, we got a cute little pod of dolphins. It wasn't just one or two.
I mean, that water just looks beautiful. We had ideal splashdown parameters today. Obviously, wave height, ne'er a concern. The weather is beautiful, as Jaden mentioned, in the 60s, sunny. Looking forward to seeing Crew 9 exit the capsule here shortly once they get hoisted onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We can see that recovery vessel slowly but surely closing the distance there between... Oh, dolphin cam back again. We can see that the Dragon capsule and the recovery vessel, that distance is closing. Again, this is just one more step as we continue to work recovery operations for Dragon Freedom. And we anticipate the lift of the Dragon capsule to occur here in just a few minutes. Now, once all of the rigging is on the capsule and it's hooked up to the recovery vessel, we will see the hydraulic arm, which is that kind of like bridge-like structure there at the aft end of the recovery vessel. We'll see that articulate backwards, and that's a good sign that we're getting even closer to pulling the capsule out of the water. It will then move forward, and the capsule will be placed inside of what you can see there is basically a basket. We call it the nest, Dragon nest, that's where the capsule will be placed in order for it to be translated to the forward end of the vessel and for the astronauts to egress.
And before that does take place, we'll have potentially views of the rigger go ahead and jump off of the spacecraft there.
That typically occurs when the spacecraft is a little bit closer to the recovery vessel, and we usually get a really good view of that particular operation from one of the onboard cameras from the recovery vessel. That is an operation that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, that individual that does that.
So again, Dragon continuing to get closer and closer to the recovery vessel Megan. You see some of those ropes now coming into view as well. If you are just joining us, Crew 9 splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, Sunny Williams, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbunoff. They're now working through procedures to hoist this spacecraft up onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We just saw that hydraulic arm get lowered into the lifting position. That arm will be the mechanism that is utilized to lift Dragon up and out of the water and into the nest located there at the aft end of the recovery vessel.
And the recovery vessel being used today is, as we mentioned multiple times, is named Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan MacArthur, who flew on Crew 2 a couple of years ago. We're getting some views now from actually inside the boat.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This view is straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the egress platform.
Freedom, rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan. As a SpaceX recovery team member, will actually go into the capsule, into Dragon Freedom to help the crew members unbuckle and stand up, and essentially we'll also see a fun little slide be put in place to help the crew members exit the spacecraft safely. So yeah, we're gonna remove all 4 of those footrests to basically give a little bit more working room inside the spacecraft.
That's right. And we did hear the go for that hatch opening, so we're just a couple minutes away from being able to see that. And then we might be able to get the chance to see a couple of views inside of the Dragon and see the crew following their splashdown.
Now, opening that side hatch isn't quite like opening, the door to your car. We have to depress the seal around the side hatch, as well as, we'll now see them open that side hatch up.
And there you have it. The side hatch is open for the first time since September.
We can see some of the protective equipment there that was brought into frame that will help protect the edge of the side hatch, one from any potential damage. Oh, we can see the recovery crew member there taking photos of the side hatch seal. This is part of the standard operation for recovery. These photos will get saved into our procedure. We'll then install that protective frame around the side hatch. This helps to ensure that the side hatch itself, the edges of it, incur no damage while crew members are coming out from the spacecraft. If you missed it, there was also a recovery team member that went inside. So there are now 5 people on board the Dragon spacecraft.
And if you are just joining us, it has not yet even been an hour since Crew 9 splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. The crew is now on board the recovery vessel Megan, and the hatch is open. The next major milestone that we'll see is when the crew will actually egress or exit the spacecraft. But before that, they'll continue to, the recovery personnel rather, will continue to install that protective area around the hatch and then remove the footrests. So we're a couple minutes away from seeing the crew egress, but not too long away.
We'll probably see those footrests being handed out here in the near future, as I mentioned before. Oh, of course, we got to get a well-documented photo of the moment. Although we can't see it from here, I'm pretty sure there are 4 smiles on board right now.
And we did hear that report out from the commander, Nick Hague, following splashdown, that there were four smiles as far as he could see.
Yeah, capsule full of grins. Now, generally speaking...
And there we do see Crew 9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
Generally speaking, we have the individuals in the 2 center seats of the spacecraft exit first. You might hear us refer to this as the exit process as egress. It's just another term for exiting the spacecraft. Generally speaking, we most of the time have the 2 center seats egress first, as it makes moving around inside the capsule a little bit easier. We can see the tablets that were previously located on the upper leg of the crew members. We can see those being handed out to the recovery team. Those were taken off prior to the entry phase, to spacecraft reentry. Those had to be stored and secured prior to dynamic operations.
It looks like we are starting to see the footrests also be removed. I just saw one there on the screen. There are 4, of course, 1 for each crew member.
Those footrests are made out of carbon fiber and are actually sized appropriately for each crew member, as everybody has different measurements and different leg lengths. Same goes for the armrests and the bucket length of each seat. We size those appropriately for the crew members and to ensure their comfort and safety. I believe we just saw the little ramp that is used to help slide the crew members out from inside the spacecraft.
And once the crew does exit Dragon Freedom, they will be placed on to a stretcher to go to a medical bay for medical checkouts. This is standard procedure for all Dragon spacecraft flights that splash down crewed, as well as for our Soyuz spacecraft that land in Kazakhstan.
We could see the exterior of Dragon Freedom quite clearly in this shot, and it's such a beautiful sight. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
Continuing to stand by for our first crew member to egress or exit. Crew Dragon Freedom following their splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Dragon undocked from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific just yesterday, so it was about 17 hours of phasing. And while on board the International Space Station, Crew 9 contributed to 900 hours of science, over 150 research experiments and investigations, making great use of the microgravity lab of the International Space Station, which celebrates 25 years of continuous human presence this November.
Looks like we're about to get our first crew member here upon egress of the Dragon spacecraft.
So we are standing by for that egress. Outside of Dragon, you do see one of those stretchers. This is the expected procedure as the crew will be taken to medical facilities following their exit from Dragon.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew 9, now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Now, the 2 crew members remaining in Dragon are NASA astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore. They completed 286 days in space.
one of the remaining footrests being removed from the Dragon spacecraft. As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the 2 center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew 9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. It looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
Well, now that Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander are safely back home on Earth,